think so. Can you hear
us with that? Welcome to this, which is the third of our series of talks about the early origins of the church in Billingham. I'm Charles Wellington, I'm from the Friends, and I'm standing in for Bernard Taylor, who chaired the previous two meetings, if you came along for those. Can I sincerely welcome our speaker this evening, Martin Roberts. He's going to roll forward from the Anglo-Saxons, which we've concentrated on before, to telling us about the monastic granges here in Billingham, and I think giving us a brief review of them wider than Billingham too. Martin was here for our first talk by Robin Daniels, and Robin was clearly an ancient stones person. But when it came to buildings, he said he always deferred to Martin, who is preeminent in the field. And that must be right, given his role as revising author of the Durham edition of Pesler's Buildings of England. So we've got an expert here with us tonight, I'm really pleased. But before I just hand over to Martin, may I mention that when his talk is concluded, I'd like to just say a very few words about how we can now build on the three marvellous talks that we've had. But without more ado, can I introduce Martin Roberts to speak to us tonight.
Thank you. Well, I'm not sure. Can you hear me all right? I'm not sure this is on. Is it?
It's not working.
It's not working, is it? No.
Okay.
I was told what to do.
Is the microphone is on the table?
No, I was wired up for walking around.
That's better.
Hang on. Is that better? No. Let's get this sorted out. I'm sorry, I was shown how to do this, but I'm not sure.
Paul is coming, he says, press the button.
That comes up, it goes off again. Well, he's coming, shall I?
Yeah.
I'm going to keep you pressed.
What's his problem?
Okay now? Yeah. Good. I tend to wave my hands around, so forgive me if the volume goes on and off all the time. Thank you for inviting me. This is a bit more esoteric than Anglo-Saxon history of Billingham Church, but thank you for coming anyway, because I want to talk about the three priory granges that are around Stockton, Billingham area. Billingham, I was going to say Bellasis, I call it Bellasis, not Molasses, Bellasis and Bewley, and we'll look at those in some detail. But I want to give you a little bit of background into what priory granges are actually all about. Then we're going to whiz through, relatively quickly, a range of other monastic granges in the county, so that you get some idea how you compare with your three. And some of the remains, there's a pattern to them, which I think will become evident. Good job. Okay, sorry. I hope this works, though. I'm talking about looking out. Okay. So basically, we're going to talk first of all about what a priory grange is. Because some people think, oh, it's a priory, and then they refer to Bow Repair, for example, as a priory. It's not, it's a priory grange. And I want to say a little bit about the background to the economy of Durham Cathedral. Right. See how we do it. Is that better? Oh, yeah. That feels right. Is that okay? Good. Yeah. That's great, because I can move around that. Okay. So this is very much about this building. And the reference to revenue, not capital, is simply that when you look at a building and we understand and learn about the dates of the buildings, we know that Durham Cathedral was built 1093 to 1133, and at such a part. The Galilee Chapel was added later, and then in the 13th century, the nine altars, and you learn about it, the building history in terms of capital projects to build this part, to build the initial building. This is the boring bit in some ways, because this is all about the revenue that's needed to sustain an institution like this. And that's why this is a little bit off piste, as it were. When you see a bouncy castle, okay, when you go past it, I always thought bouncy castles, you load them up and you put a plug in and then the kids play on them and they gradually go down and then you pump it up again. Then you don't. If you notice, there's an air pump, continually blasting air in order to make the structure work. And that's the sort of analogy I want you to try and get in your head. Durham Cathedral as an institution could not exist on simple capital projects unless there are, well, let's start at the high altar, unless there's candle wax to perform the liturgy, there's food and clothing for the monks, there's stones and tiles and timber for the buildings, and not only in the church but also in the cloisters and the outer court and the college and so on. There's a vast amount of resources needed. Got to be coming in every day, every week, in order to sustain this institution. And so what we're going to do is, and basically what we're going to look at is how that was achieved. A little bit of background history. Well, certainly these are the writers who have made a study of Durham Cathedral and its estates. Dick Lomas was a professor of geography, I think, professor of history, wrote a very good book on the North East history. Jane Fielding, and I will lend this to Charles. This is a wonderful thesis that was done in 1980 by a student called Jane Fielding, looking at the Bursars Manors, the manor houses. These are the Priory Granges. Very much the inspiration behind what I've always been interested in. John Weller was an architect who was interested in, he was in Essex, would you believe, but was fascinated by the Durham Cathedral accounts. So Robin was talking about Anglo-Saxons, and of course the Anglo-Saxons brought the its body to Durham Cathedral in, well, to what became Durham Cathedral in 995. And the community of St Cuthbert, that's the same body that was basically on Lindisfarne and then brought the body to Durham. They were an Anglo-Saxon community. They didn't have a regular rule. They were married, they had children. They weren't what we would regard them as sort of monks in the classic sense. And the Normans didn't get on with this. They thought, well, we really want to have a strict rule, a monastic rule, some order in the place, literally. So they brought the Benedictines in, I think from Jarrow. And so in 1083, when basically the Anglo-Saxons were moved out to places like Norton and Darlington and so on, to four collegiate churches, in come the Benedictines. But that's no good because all the land in the diocese is owned by the bishop. He's getting all the income. So in order to sustain this new institution, the priory, he literally split his land. I think it's a bit 51-49, I was told, but essentially half his land he gave to the priory and said, right, these are your urban properties, you can get rents from those, these are your rural properties, develop them for food, for sustenance, for building materials. Muggleswick was very famous for timber and so on. So using these estates, you can sustain the priory into the future. So that's what he did in 1083. Now this is the most complicated slide. It gets a lot easier after this. The way the priory was organised, top man was a prior. He's using small letters there because he doesn't have an estate. Sub-prior, third prior, chaplain. And then you get these major officers of the monastery. They're called obedientries. And basically, each of them looks after a different aspect of Durham Cathedral Priory's history. The sacrist was responsible for all the liturgical, all the candle wax and so on. He was also technically responsible for the building, which was a hell of a responsibility. When the central tower collapsed in the 15th century, it was technically down to him to raise the funds for it. Somebody looked specifically after St Cuthbert's shrine and all the gifts that were presented to Ferriter. The bursar was the principal officer. Most of the estates were given, most of the land was given to the bursar for him to develop the major income for the priory. Terror was the land agent. Hosteler, these ones in yellow held major land holdings. But every one of those, every year, had to produce an account which was submitted into the priory. And all those, certainly from about the early 14th century right through to dissolution, still exists. It's one of the best collections of monastic account rolls in the country. I think Canterbury's got good ones in Westminster. But you can learn an awful lot by looking at these account rolls. And it's the yellow ones that are the principal ones. because the Bursar held most of the estates. The hostel at Albert Hall, if you know Hallgar Street, when you're coming into Durham, what they call the tithe barns, are not technically tithe barns. Albert Hall was a major estate, and that estate generated income. It went purely on what he was spending money on. So within the overall finances of the monastery, the priory, the cathedral, there was a separate accounting system for every aspect of these offices. Almoner had 2 hospitals at Whit and Gilbert, and I can't remember you off the top of my head, but he had, again, income was occasionally, was always spent on what he was working on. If there was a problem and some major disaster happened, a mill collapsed, a bridge collapsed, then obviously they could get more funds from the Bursar. But essentially, they all tried to keep in their sort of silos, dividing up their finances. What we're going to look at principally today are the Bursar's estates. This is where they were. I mean, there are smaller estates. I was in Weardale this morning, and there are smaller farms and things belonging to the Bursars scattered around Weardale. But essentially, it's in the centre and to the east of the county. Muggleswick is the most westerly one. And your 3 are Bewley, Bellasys and Billingham. But that's the range of accounts. And we have detailed accounts of buildings, supplies, sales of animals, provisions, food and so on, spreading out amongst these granges. They are all principally farms, they're working farms, that's the main thing you've got to understand. However, on practically every one, there is a very high status house added in, which is called the Prior's Lodgings. The Prior did not sit in Durham Cathedral, in what is now the deanery. The present deanery was the Prior's Lodgings. There's a lovely story, I mean, the last prior of Durham Cathedral, on the last day of the dissolution of the monastery, he went to bed as prior of the Cathedral Monastery and woke up as Dean of Durham Cathedral. So, I mean, this idea that when the dissolution of the monasteries happened, it all stopped and we started again. Hugh Whitehead just went through and woke up the next day and he had a different job, but he hadn't held the same estates. So these prize lodgings were very high status. So in addition to all the barns, the cows, cow byres, pigsties, all the usual muck and mess you'd expect on a farm, there was an area of priory granges where there was a high status house. And depending on how often the prior would come and visit, you would find sometimes quite a palatial priory lodgings, sometimes just a small hall and a chapel. And we'll look at some of those. This is the cathedral. I mean, just to get you setting, I mean, the college, which is, oh my God, we can use this, can't we? This is the outer court. I mean, obviously that's the cathedral. You know the cloisters, and what is now the college is the outer court of the monastery, and it's got all the other buildings that you don't have around the cloisters. You've got the dormitory, the refectory, the chapel house here, the kitchen, but here we've got the infirmary, the guest hall, there's a granary here, there's a barn here, there's workshops, bakehouses, brew houses, all the lesser monasteries. If you go to Fountains, you get exactly the same layout. Further out from the Abbey Church, you'll get all these similar buildings that we have. And so all the food, all the provisions that were being grown or harvested from the estates were coming into this central storehouse. So this building here, when you next go into the college, it's a massive early 16th century warehouse, storehouse for provisions that are coming in from the priory granges. Right, is it the foxtrot, quick, slow, anyway, whatever, we're going to change the pace and try and whiz through just some of the other granges before we come to the 3 in around Billingham. Hoffel College, you may know, it's at the back of Hoffel College, still owned by well, it's now East Durham College, isn't it? It used to be an agricultural college. Is this farmhouse? This was demolished, but the medieval barns still survive it. It's Bursar's accounts, and it's moated. So you'll see the outline of a moat there. And several of these priory granges have moats around them. Not for defensive reasons, it's often simply a status thing to define, well, it defines an area, and if you can build a moat, it has a bit more prestige about it than simply putting a fence around it. So they're not really fearing attack necessarily, because a small moat around Hoffel isn't going to keep the Scots out if they really want to get in. But you can see it's dry there, but that sort of canalised stream is still there. This is a first edition OS map. And you'll see here the layout. This is the house that we showed the photograph of and the farm buildings that are laid out around here. And this is my sort of plan. I should colour this in. I said I could colour plans in. This is the house that was demolished in the 1960s. Much to the delight of the then head of the Hoffel Agricultural College, Warwick Percy, who delighted in telling me how he demolished it. I wasn't terribly impressed by him, but he was principal of Hoffel College. It was possibly medieval. The medieval hall was probably here. This we know is a big 17th century wing that was added. There are photographs of it, and we've got a very good set of plans. So if Robin were here, he would take some satisfaction from what they call preservation by record. That at least we photographed it. We've got the plan. So that's better than completely losing an historic building and having nothing by way of an archive of it. And yet when you look at this, it's very well known this is a medieval barn. We'll look at barns in a little bit more detail. Essentially, what you need to have in a medieval threshing barn is two big opposed doors here. And we'll see how that works. And then this is the long barn itself for both the collection of the crop and for the harvesting of it, and then the storing of the hay afterwards. The actual grain, which has been harvested, goes to a granary, as we'll see. But also here in Hoffel, we've got very thick, and you can tell by thick walls, these are metre-thick walls here of a building which we don't know what it was. But I mean, it could be a medieval cow byre, it could be a pigsty, for all I know. And all I'm saying is, these kind of farm buildings are incredibly rare. I mean, I'm not saying medieval churches are 10 a penny in County Durham or in any county, but farm buildings are extremely rare, they don't survive. I mean, obviously the Prior's Grange, because it would look posh, would have tracery windows. People would say, oh, that's old, we'll keep that. But actually, a very vernacular medieval building, which might be probably late medieval, 14th, 15th century, they tend not to survive. Right, so this is the farm house that was demolished in the 60s. So, this is the farm range roundabout. This is the building. I mean, it's not a barn. The barns tend to be big, and people keep them because they look impressive. These little triangular vents, they appear on practically all priory buildings. And since the priory buildings were built by the same workforce that operated from Durham Cathedral, there was a sort of familial, a sort of signature similarity between them all. And what they tended to use was this little triangular, just 3 stones, one on the bottom, 2 like that. And it's just a vent, that's all it is. But it appears on any building that's got it, like as not, it's related to the priory in some ways, because the same workforce was being told, put up a cow house, put up a barn, and they were using the same familiar techniques of putting these vents on. This is the actual barn. Across the plan, this opposed doors, and we'll see. You know how it works. You take the cart into the barn, offload all your unthreshed corn, beat the living daylights out of it with sticks and wattles and whatever. Open both doors and let the wind blow through, and it blows the chaff out, and you've got the grain left on the floor. And that's why you have 2 big opposed doors, so you get a cross draft. And this is just for every one of the monastic granges in Durham. We've got an account of what buildings there were. These are repair dates. So the Granges, the barns were being repaired, and all these dates with an asterisk, it means a new barn is built. But it gives you an idea of what we've got. We think we know where the hall is. This is the barn, more than likely. There's a granary somewhere, cowshed stable, lime kiln. Nothing exceptional, but and not a very big establishment. But it's sheep and cereals were the 2 products that they were establishing. Now, bow repair is something else, and if you could go and visit this, because I was involved back in the 70s and 80s in taking this into guardianship with the City Council, and then we did 5 years excavations of the site. This was the biggest monastic grange in Durham Cathedral Priory's estate. Bury's pretty big, Pittington's pretty big, Wardley's pretty big. This was huge. It was only 2 or 3 miles out. If you know where Bear Park is, it's only 2 or 3 miles out from the city centre. So it's a kind of weekend retreat for the prior. He's got business on the weekend, during the week in Durham, and he wanted to pop out and have a relaxing weekend. You wouldn't come over to Bewley, even though it was one of his bigger estates, or Pittington necessarily, but this is 2 or 3 miles away. He could be there within half an hour. And kings and so on were entertained here. We've got records there of the first and the second coming here. And it wasn't just one hall and one chamber. It's really quite palatial what is here. I could talk all night about this, but we've got a come through eventually to Billingham. And it's in the middle of a proper medieval park with a ditch around it and in some cases a wall. This is Durham's here. This is the road out to Whitton Gilbert and on to Lanchester, if you know. And when you're going along the road, it's all that land on your left to the west rather, and the estate is in the middle. A vast medieval park, and there were stud farms, cattle farms, cereal, well known for timber. A lot of the timber for a lot of the buildings in Durham Cathedral come either from Buggleswick or from Bear Park. That's a sort of composite of what we've got. This is the house. This is the palatial prior's lodgings. The farm buildings, such as they were over here. And there's a logic to this, and it runs through. It's a common to all priory estates, and it's kind of pertinent in bringing history up to date when we talk about Bellasis and that site in particular. I'm thinking of Howerton Hill and the pollution that came from ICI in the 1920s, because basically they got it wrong in the 1920s. They put the housing downwind of the chemical works. They were sensible in the medieval period. They put the house upwind, you know, so there was no smell. All this was blowing that way from the prevailing winds, and you always put the house on the west side and on the south side. So it got the sun and it didn't get any smell. And so all this is very high class. It's just as classy as any medieval church, and this is the agricultural bit that goes with it. But then here there are some. You always use the word unique, don't you? You put an adjective in front of you. You shouldn't. I think certainly in the north of England, as we'll see. Oh, sorry, I beg pardon. This building is unique, and we'll see a picture of it. It's just a farm building, but they're very rare. We've got 2 pages of what's at Bow Repair. Halls, lots of different chambers. Well, you can see what they're all down there. And in the accounts, we get details of, you know, repairs to walls, repairs to roofs, putting a new window in the chamber or whatever. So it's fantastically informative, the priory account rolls. And several barns, not just one big barn. Got a hay barn, large barn, and so on. And the second page, well, nothing. Well, I think wave drafted. I don't know what a wave draft is. Oh, sorry. There was some talk it might be a cheese room, but somebody got an idea of whey, and sort of. I was speaking to a farmers group once. Aqueductors don't think of Segovia and great arches going across the river. It's a lead pipe, but there was a water supply fed into the Priory Grange. And this is the excavation results that carried out in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So, a major hall, a chamber here, a chapel here. So the north is this way, you should really rotate it, but it's an east-facing chapel that would be appropriate. Chambers here, enlarged in the 13th century to make the toilet. That's the pit for the toilet. And the only way you could clean that out when it was built in the 13th century was with a bucket and spade. Not ideal. So instead of which, when they extended it here, and they had running water, there was a system of water which came into a tank here, ran across the site, picked up the kitchen, ran down there and down the hillside, so there was flowing water all the time, which would take poo away and all the rest of it. Very clever system. But this was then, this was then complemented. This was originally a retirement home for one of the priors. When it came back to the monastery after that prior had died, because it was so handy to have a site 2 or 3 miles away from Durham, the then prior, the new prior in the late 13th century, built a big aisled hall. And aisled halls are indicative of reception and welcome and high status banqueting almost. You could live as an individual prior in your hall here with your chapel and your chambers, probably a kitchen here. But this is a big ceremonial hall where you would receive guests where Edward I, when he comes, he's taken out from the cathedral to Bow Repair. And traditionally you'd have a central hearth. Much as they did, I mean, you know, horrible thing, because instead of having a nice fireplace keeping all the smoke away, it was quite traditional to have a central hearth right through the medieval period as a sort of symbol of this is how we come together communally. And so there was this big aisled hall which was never fully excavated. The excavation stopped there. very big one, and a very well documented site as well. So it was all consolidated. This is the remaining. You can go and see it now. They're all there, standing and so on. And it's also well drawn. Right, very well drawn by Grimm, Samuel Hieronymus Grimm, and all sorts of people. Lots of retired vicars in the 18th century went out and did little sketches of bow repair. So there's a lot, at that point you just need a roof on it basically, and it's all still there. Wonderful chapel, beautiful chapel. And this is the old building. Going across the farmyard to the eastern side was sort of downwind of the posh buildings. This building was a mystery to me when it came in. It originally had a tin roof on it, but it had some interesting windows, and it also had some timber beams here. And when we investigated it, it had 14 bays, basically, the length of it, and we didn't know whether this was the old part, this end, until we looked, and the wall plate on the top had Roman numerals on to mark out the position of the roof trusses. And to our delight, these were number 12, 13 and 14, or 11, 10, 11, 12, these beams here. And so counting back, we knew that this was the original length of the building. It is possible, well, probable, we don't know what it was used for, because you'll notice it's got very nice timber frame windows. Now, you don't put timber frame windows like this in a cow byre. This is for residential accommodation. It's for somebody to live. The thought is that it may actually be a row of medieval cottages for farm workers. And there's one known in Durham, in Devon rather, but that's the only one anybody's ever told me about. I shared this with the National Vernacular Architecture Conference. Said, is there another building like this? We don't have one in the northeast of England. I'm pretty sure they don't have one in the northwest. And so this is remarkably rare. And the nice thing was dendrochronology, which you'll no doubt know all about from Time Team and so on. Dendrochronology was able to work on it, and we got a date of 1475 for these timbers here. So what we did, when somebody wanted to convert it, we said, well, if we put the roof back the way it would have been, 45 degrees, that will enable you to extend the roof. They initially wanted to add on extensions. And we said, no, just put the form of it back the way it would have been in 1475 and keep all this. And you'll see they've done a very nice job of keeping these windows. They've not glazed within them, they've put the glass on the outside, got some other windows alongside, but there are 4 or 5 of these 1475 oak windows. Amazing survival. The barn is gone, we've had photographs of it, but this is the foundation of it. If you've got metre thick walls, you've got a medieval building, pretty much. And this is the foundation of a building, this one here, which I think this was the barn. That's that building, and I'd say that's the medieval priory's lodgings. Pittington, this has been converted now, I've never been back to see it, but this is another big barn with a modern roof, with an asbestos roof. It's now been converted with a steeper roof, I think. But Pittington was another of the 4 major sites. They were called the Looney sites. It was the most lavish of the prior's lodgings, and the ones he went to most. Bow Repair, we've just seen. Pittington, Wardley, near on Tyneside, and Bewley. Bewley was a very important site as well. And these are where the most sumptuous apartments were. But the nice thing about Pittington is it's got a medieval barn, but it's got no timbers. What it has got, however, is this, which is the entrance. I explained about opposed doors so you can thresh. You take your cart laden with the crop high, stacked high in here, so you've got a very high opening here, right, okay. And then, so this is the plan of it, so you're going in there. It's very like Hoffelbarn, and the idea is the door is not in the middle. If you notice, it's very much at one end. You bring your unthreshed crop in here. This is your threshing floor, and then when you've threshed it and you've winnowed it and so on, and you've taken the chaff out, you stack the hay in here. And this is the only one that's got an original threshing floor still left. And this is the exit, because you've got rid of your crop now, so when you take your cart out, you don't need to have a 20-foot opening, you can have a 10-foot opening. So you can always tell which side the crop's going in and which side it's coming out by the height of the door coming out. And this is a late 15th century, probably the date range for these buildings is mid-14th century, mid-15th century to dissolution pretty much. much to mid-16th century. And of course, it's often reusing timbers which are themselves older from older buildings. So this might come from a 12th or 13th century building, we don't know. But it's still there. It's not listed, I don't think. I couldn't get it listed, amazingly. Don't know why. And we've got one illustration of the prior's lodgings at Pillington, and this is it. It was a very late rebuilding. This is a sort of almost like a Tudor house on the site. This is the site now. If you know the Manor House Hotel at Orgarth Pillington, it's there. The church of St Lawrence is down here. The prior's lodgings were down here. Okay, and again, all the farmers here. So it's the same thing. You put your prior's lodgings upwind, and the smelly bit is down here. There's a barn, there's another building which looks as if it may well be 16th century as well on site here. So it's another big, fascinating site. Whitton Gilbert, if you go through Whitton, well, you've got a bypass now, if you go through the old village, but turn down towards the church, Whitton Hall Farm, was the almoners. It was a leper hospital as well as being a grange, and it's the actual prior's lodgings here are pretty impressive. This is a really lovely, what is it, very late 12th, early 13th century window, still in place in what was probably the prior's hall, the chapel, we don't know. This is the building, and again, dental technology, we were able to get grants to do work on this. This is North East Vernacular Architecture Group, got a research grant to date 8 buildings. And these timbers here, it's called a truncated principal roof, because the principals, which are those bits, don't go to the apex, they just stop short, saves you a bit of timber. That runs right throughout there, and all dated to about 1496. So it's either the chapel or the hall, and it's there. But, in addition, there's this, which is a barn, which again has got its original timbers. You can just make out in the end, that's the original shape of the barn, 45-degree pitch. It was raised into a granary, to put a granary on the first floor in the 19th century, but the joists which are in the granary are in fact a tie beam. The tie beams are the original roof trusses here, all dated to 1462. And that's an original door, a massive oak frame in the middle with a huge timber beam over the entrance. That's that door there. And this was another barn. Almost certainly, I think, this is where here is where the doors, the big doors were. When you get big doors and when buildings fall down, they tend to collapse around about these big doors because I think the beams go, those ones are fitting and imagine those decaying. You're going to collapse, and they rebuilt this in the 19th century. But this is the medieval building, the 1462 building, still surviving. Muggleswick is the best to go and see it. If you haven't seen it, it's Muggleswick, it's about west. And this is the chapel of the prior's lodgings. And it's relevant to Beaulieu particularly because there are parallels. When you look at the plans of, for example, the prior's lodgings of Fingal Priory, it's the same prior. Look at the prior's lodgings of Durham Cathedral, which is the deanery. Look at the prior's lodgings of the Bow Repair. Look at the prior's lodgings here. Look at the prior's lodging at Beaulieu. All built in the 13th century. It's a campaign to give the prior a decent set of apartments. And they've all got a very similar plan. So that's why it's good to see these, because it informs what you know about Beaulieu and the Billingham Granges. So this is another medieval park. Another medieval park. Big area of woodland, and still a bit of relic woodland still left in the valleys down here, and remains of a wall. Characteristically, the stones are sometimes set vertically like this. And 2 fish ponds just outside the village with a little bank between the two, where there's a dam between 2 fish ponds. So there's a wider estate to be seen in Muggleswick. This is the building that survives this building here, and this is the chapel. And all you need to remember, it's relevant when we look at Beaulieu, is that this is the chapel, and this building here, you can kind of, with your eye, link that into one long building. That is a hall and chamber for the resident prior. And he got from here into his chapel, where the two buildings overlap here, there would have been a door to get into the end of the chapel. Chapel facing east, as you'd expect, like any church. That's the sort of signature which you see repeated at all these priory lodgings. So this is the 13th century east wall of the chapel. It was later converted in the after the dissolution into another house, and a floor was inserted. So there's a fireplace in the inserted into the window. And if you think about it, if you've got a medieval chapel which isn't necessarily heated, and you want to put a fireplace into it, the best place to build the fireplace where you can then run a flue up is in the window space. You know, we put a fire there, just encase the flue and take it through the window and out through the roof. I've seen it done several times, Hilton Hall's done it. So basically there is a flue going there where there would have been a window, rather like your east window here, but then the fireplace inserted. But that's a magnificent display. And this is Peter Ryder's impression of what it looked like. So it had a sort of, almost a fortified look. It possibly was walled. These would be the prior's lodgings, and there'd be some farm buildings and barns here as well. And this is the main farm building, the main prior's lodgings that are attached to the chapel. And it's that overlap. The critical point is where the two buildings merge, as we'll see. Ferry Hill, just to say there was one, we don't know where it is, but there is of course a Swannery Ferry Hill, and it's amazing, but if you go into the Ferry Hill cut, and you can do it quite easily, if you walk down here, there is this amazing cut, because of course Ferry Hill, be careful what I say, because I'm not a geologist, but this is where the meltwater channel from glaciers to the north flowed out into northern cars and all that. It's a fascinating geological landscape, and it's the only place where you can take the East Coast main line, bang through the middle. So it's an exciting place when you go down there. But there was a medieval swannery, one for the bishop running that way, and one for the prior running this way. And you can actually walk, almost like walking in paddy fields. You walk on a flat bit of field, and then you go up a stone wall, and you go up another step. It's a terraced landscape here, which needs to be studied, because, I mean, medieval swanneries are very rare. And there was a swan house down here, we know. So that's a really exciting landscape, so different from just your boring medieval parish church, but it's the complementary buildings that have to go as part of the wider medieval landscape. Now, Albert Hall is a more public one. This is Hallgarth Street, and you probably know this. This is coming into Durham from Shincliffe, and if you don't know it, when you go past the terrace, just take a left turn if you go towards, a right turn if you go towards the prison, and again, it's just the error of history that makes these buildings part of the Durham prison complex now, because they're banged up against the prison wall. And this is the building that everybody paints and photographs and sketches, because it's sort of a picturesque building. It's also very rare. It's a medieval granary, and we know it's got a date of 1450 to 52. It's been documented. We know who plastered it. We know where the materials came from. Been dendro-dated. So in all sorts of ways, we're very precise about this. And the granary was probably, I don't want to say it's more important than the church, but if the church caters for the soul of the population, then the granary caters for its stomach, if you like, because this is where all the seed corn comes from. The crop is stored for next year's harvest. It's kept on the first floor. This is a cart shed underneath. It's plastered out inside to keep vermin out. It's got a very secure roof. I mean, that's shown with a bit of thatch on, but originally it would have been a stone roof. On a granary, you wouldn't thatch a granary, because A, you'd get vermin, and B, you'd let the rain in eventually. And it's the one place that's got to remain dry, because you've got to have crops to sow for next year. If that gets wet and the vermin eat it, you risk starvation. You can't sow your crops in all the fields around Shincliffe and around Durham to the south of Durham. So it's a vitally important building. You go to northern Spain, and they're still called Oreos, which is the original Latin word, and you'll find village squares. Instead of having some market crosses in the middle, they have a raised granary, because that's the symbol. And it's somewhere public where everybody can see it. This sticks out in the middle of the, I've got the plan, yes. That's the granary. It's not round the back. If it's round the back, you can ignore it, and then the next thing you know, the rats are at it. Because you pass it every day, everybody's looking at that building and saying, yes, roof's okay, no sign of damp, no sign of rats. And you've got to keep that because that's the most precious building you've got. And it's coming from all these buildings. Certainly those three are barns. There were 4 barns. There was everything, but there was barley, wheat, I don't know, the rye barn, I think. There was an oats barn, there wasn't a rye barn. But anyway, there was a vast powerhouse for producing cereals. I don't think that's a barn, but that's a medieval building as well. They're all dated to the 15th century. This possibly might be a 13th century one. And I say the granary we know 1452, but this is the original layout as on the first edition OS map, which slightly amended. This is the Great Barn, which we have a documented date 1444, 1446 rather. This is this one. This one's only slightly smaller, and it's got battered walls. And although the roof is common to both, I think the walls might be 14th century. It's now a prison officers' club, so it's painted sort of lemon yellow inside. It's quite peculiar, but these are the original timbers. This is the building which was bang up against the prison wall. This is the prison wall. The prison wall was up till about the mid-80s, when the IRA prisoners started to come here, and it was given a very high security rating. They built a new prison wall, and this, which is that wall, when the building itself was part of the prison and accessible to the prison, eventually that fell down, and they just kept that wall as a prison wall. And then with the IRA and security, we needed a new proper wall, so that's what's just behind there. And you can now walk around the back of this and see the original barn wall. If you do walk around the back, you'll have dogs and prison warders within 5 seconds, because every camera will pick you up. So if you do walk around the back, it's best to go and tell the prison you want to look at the back of the barn wall. Otherwise they'll come and ask you what you're doing. But yeah, interesting place. And that's the granary. It's really lovely. It's a billiard room. And I gave them lots of information to prison officers about the medieval timber, about the medieval farm. They wanted to know about it. They're lovely, lovely people. I've known them for many years. And what they really were interested in doing was putting a display all around the walls in there of all the people who've been hung in Durham prison over the years, highlighting Mary Ann Compton, people like that. So it's a bit gruesome, every wall, just names and names of people who've been strung up. It's really a bit sad. There we go. Now Sacriston, well, no Sacriston, the place, north of Dilworth, it's based on this house called Sacriston Jeff, which was demolished in about 1958. And again, we've got photographs of it. I'm desperately trying to find somebody who was in it, who'd been in it before it was demolished. Maybe need to go to a local photograph website or something, but we have some photographs of it. It was above Sacriston. It's up here, and this is it. And we know some of the buildings that were there, and from the photographs we can kind of put together a sort of plan, and the plan shouts that basically this is a medieval hall, this is a cross wing, think of Seton Home, that kind of plan at Easington. This would be the solar, there's a staircase, there's a little porch here. So it's fitting in with the sort of Priory Grange. This is the Prior's lodgings part, not the medieval farm buildings, they're somewhere else. Yeah, so there's about 4 or 5 photographs of it, which is a bit frustrating. That's all we've got. But then, this is what was being produced, a whole range of stuff, animal particularly strong. And then, very frustratingly, there are these photographs. I mean, that's a 13th century doorway. That's the same doorway, but I don't know where it is in the building. I don't know anybody. I can't find anybody who was around in 1958 and who can remember where this was. That is a sketch probably of that. There's a vaulted cellar somewhere. These are both outside, that's okay, but actually placing that door on the plan is very difficult and very frustrating. Now, right, I'll have a quick swig of my drink and we'll come to your 3. Billingham, in some ways, is the, well, I don't know if, Charles was saying, if you worked at ICI, you'll know it's the health centre, I think. Is that, I'm pretty sure I know 2 people who worked at ICI and said it was the health centre. But it's the least known about in terms, we know what it was in terms of what buildings were there, but in terms of survival of fabric, we've got better information in some ways on Bellicis and Bury. That's it. I mean, I can't get rid of obviously the Stockton Archive thing. That looks to me nothing remotely medieval. It looks like what I would call bog standard mid to late 18th century farmhouse. I think it's possibly even brick underneath there, I don't know. So that's the farmhouse. There was a farm buildings behind it. Whether any of those were of medieval origin, I have no idea. This is it, sitting quietly in the countryside, just minding its own business. It's that and the little wing at the back. If you keep that shape in your head, there's obviously a mill pond here, that might be part of it. That looks, I mean, there could be medieval farm buildings there, we don't know. One of them seemed to survive into the ICI period, and obviously this does, but what happens to it is this. And the beauty of it is, of course, that everything else is incredibly parallel. The entire chemical works are laid out on this grid. But this is ever so slightly at an angle, and so you can pick it up on aerial photographs that this is where the farm was, and this is what was retained as the health centre. So when you get that, you can actually spot it. It's the one thing that's slightly out of kilter. That's it, I think. So I think that's the building there, and that's the wing. There's a building over here that looks as if it might belong to the farm as well, but that was taken out later on. And last of all was the farmhouse to go. But it's just that slight 2 or 3 degrees angle different from the rigid geometry of the rest of the chemical works that's impressive. But that's all we know about it. Well, we do know a little bit about it. That's it again. We've got an account. We know what was built. It's not huge. It's got a hall, camera, kitchen. That's part of the prize lodgings. And then we get into the farm buildings, and again, barns galore, a lot of repairs to the barns, granary, cow byre stables, nothing out of the ordinary, but it's a working farm. A few more things, piggeries, hen houses, domestic cellar. That's a house, like I showed at Sacriston. It's a hall with a wing to it, with a sort of private apartments. But again, that's the best we can do. But I wonder whether that might be that or even that. I don't know. I mean, there may well be, I don't know, is there a big ICI archive? I don't know. You'd think somebody would take a photograph of it before it was demolished. Is there a local ICI archive? I don't know.
There is in Teesside Lighthouse, I think we've got a lot.
Is there? Right, yeah. But there's a lot to learn about.
And sort of being.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
you
Yeah.
have a big archive about it.
Does it? Right. Oh, it's useful to know. Right, thanks. And then you get really, and then in the account rolls themselves, and again, I don't know, I can't read medieval Latin documents, there's no point in reading the original, but a lot of the material in the account rolls were transcribed into 3 volumes of the Surtees Society volume in the 19th century, and so you get wonderful translation, so we get a lot of detail. And so here we've got a crook-framed granary. We know that crook frames are those timbers that start on the ground and go up and form the roof as well. You don't have walls and a truss, you have it all in one curved structure. So they're quite rare. And so here we've got, and the word that's important is siles. 7 couples of siles, 7 pairs of curved timbers. So that means if we've got end bays, we've got 6 bays. And same, you've got 5 bays in the nave there. We'd have 6 arcades, 6 bays of this granary, and usually the siles, the couples, would actually form the end walls as well. And it's a timber frame building. Doesn't seem to be any stone. Wattling the roof and so on, spars for the walls and whatever. And they've been moving the material from Bewley to Billingham to build it. So and we've got all the rates of pay and all the rest of it. Fantastically detailed account. Okay. Now, Bellasis is fascinating because, and I'll have to at some point just read you a bit because I get the names wrong. There's only 3 photographs of this place. Oh, sorry. There's only 3 photographs of this place. That's one of them. I think. I could be wrong, and maybe, and it survived up until the Second World War, so we'd like to think there'll be a few more around. It's a bit of, it's not a big monastic, it's not like Bewley, it's not like Bow Repair, or Pittington, not a big manor, but it's tantalisingly fascinating because there's so little survived of it. And what did was just down to individual people who said, what's that? That's interesting, I think I need to make a record of that. I'll have to read you this because I've got a report. I'll leave the report with Charles, but I mean, I wrote this 15 years ago, it's still not finished, but it gives some information about Bellises. And it says here, I'll just read it first couple. Any attempt to set down a record of Bellises Hall Farm, as it's done before its destruction in World War II, is entirely dependent on the efforts of 5 female members of the Allen family who lived here, and one husband who had historically expected to make a record of the ruined buildings days before its final demolition. In 1928, Gertrude, one of the 8 children of Arthur and Alice Allen, who lived at Bellises, they lived there from 1922 to 1936, married a man called Charles Smith, and gave birth to a daughter called Avril, who married a man who was a Methodist minister from Teesside called Henry Lee. And I met Avril when she was in her 80s, about 15 years ago. I suspect she's no longer with us, bless her, but her husband had just died, and he was the local Methodist minister and a massively keen historian. She showed me his archive. It must be somewhere. I can't believe. I mean, she hadn't got rid of it because her husband had only died the year before. She was living in Constant. I'm sure she would have given it to the local record office somewhere in Teesside. It was a good local historian's record of lots of observations and going out on site and making measurements and photographs and all the rest of it. And basically, this place got hit by a stray bomb in the Second World War, meant for ICI, I suppose, or whatever. And basically this was demolished at the time. But it was a ruin. And it's some debate whether the Luftwaffe destroyed this or the local lads, because some said it was quite a decent building, and then the local lads played with it like a bomb site and demolished the rest of it. Maybe a bit unfair. Anyway. But that's interesting enough. But Avril had a cousin who also was the same age, and she was called June Johnson. I met her, and the two of them pitched in all their memories of this place, their memories of kids. But they had an aunt called, hang on, what's her name? Iris Johnson. Iris Johnson, who was an Allen, was alive at the time that I was doing this 15 years ago, and she was living in Adelaide, Australia, with her daughter, Gillian Williams. And she was there in a care home, and she was 98, and she had the foresight to think, what I really need to do before I pop off is do a plan of Bellises Hall Farm. So she scribbled a plan of what she remembers this to be like, gave it to her daughter Gillian, who probably helped to draw it, and then sent it to Avril and June back in England, who gave me a copy, and that's a working document. I just think this lady sitting in Adelaide at 98, the last thing she should be worried about is a bombed out farm on Teesside. Bless her, she had the foresight. She's obviously she was inherently a local historian at heart, and was keen to record this. So again, this is just, it's not a big place. Hall chamber, quite a small granary. It's got a barn, everyone's got a barn. But interesting, Domus Super Ponton. There's a house on the bridge, or a room over the bridge. So you can imagine a gatehouse of some sort with a room over the top. Think of Keepia Gatehouse in Durham, or the College Gatehouse if you go down the Bailey in Durham. There's a chapel over the top. It's that sort of configuration. So here it is, first edition. This is second edition. A moated site. So it's got a moat here, a sort of triangular moat. That's the hall there. I don't know anything about the farm buildings, whether any of those were part of the medieval arrangement, I don't know. This is it still, enclosed in Haverton Hill. Haverton Hill's over here. Stupidly built, dare I say, downwind with the ICI. And I mean, and what was fascinating, and I wasn't there to think about public health, I was thinking about medieval building when I met Avril, but she said when we used to go to the farm, all the cattle were sick, and when people used to stay there, their eyes were streaming over the weekend if they were staying for the weekend, because the acid was so strong, the pollution was so bad. Presumably there's been studies of Haverton Hill, and God knows they must have suffered down there, but I mean, it's dreadful. That's all clear now because basically the site, well, these are the three photographs, fortunately taken in different directions. So if you put that with an ordnance survey plan and you blow it up and you put Iris Johnson's recollection of it, you begin to create and pull back, as it were, from the grave almost, the remnants of what this building looked like. And what's significant is that although the building looks like it's running that way, the important bit is the bit going that way, from the front to the back, with that massive chimney stack, that huge stack, and that's what I ended up kind of getting close to. This is the bridge. The bridge was there. This is in the 1920s. Just to see it, looks like a medieval bridge, and there would have been an archway there. This is the moat around it. And this is the Allen family. Some of these might be, I don't know who they are, but this is part of Avril's collection of photographs. And it's just interesting because they're photographed in front of the farm by the moat. I suspect that's either Avril or June because we're talking them being born in the 1920s, 1930s. And that's the site today. The business park is here, and you can still just about get to the moat, but it's all been cleared because all the housing that was in Houghton Hill and that area has been cleared as well. And this is Harry Lee's plan. He took two photographs. That's all he took after the Luftwaffe had demolished it. And you can make something out of this actually. I mean, if you look at it and study it for some length, and that's his plan of it. And he wrote a series of notes. That's why it's so vital. I can't believe that Avril didn't give it to a local archive because she knew that her husband had done a huge amount of research and he had the presence of mind to think, I'll go and record that before it disappears completely. This was the plan that was done by Iris Johnson in Australia when she was 98. Probably drawn by her daughter, in fairness, but she was describing the plan and where things were and whatever. And it was difficult to make sense of it entirely, but I had a go. And this is as far as I've got. I mean, all I can do is you can work out certain from here, there's certain elements of it, like this is a brick, so that's thin, that's a thing. It's this that comes out, and it looks like what we'd call a solar block, a sort of private apartments range of the original hall. The hall may well have been here, that bit like sacristan, and that would be the hall. This is the feature, which I can never quite get the length of various descriptions. This is a very, very big chimney stack, which might have been spanned across two rooms, and I couldn't work out whether it went to here or here, but I'll have to draw this up at some point, if only to say, well, this is as far as we can get with Iris Johnson's memories. But I just think it's an amazing... And then, yes, that's right, June's daughter wrote an essay, for a school essay, on this, and included all the drawings and photographs. So we've got three generations, basically, of the Allen family and so on, who kept the memory of Bellasis going, which is fantastic. Right, lastly, beauty. Just a dramatic photograph, this. And it's so sad. This is the thing that really upsets me, because of course you know the site is in the middle of nowhere, because they designated an apartment for all the surrounding local authority housing. And if you knew that, and when you were partly demolishing the building, and it looked like a bog standard 18th century farmhouse, in fairness, a bit like the Billingham farmhouse, and as soon as you saw a little bit of that arch sticking out, you should have known straight away to stop. And as soon as you measured the walls were meter thick. Well, I mean, an 18th century farmhouse, would be half that size in thickness. Somebody, and they knew the site was important. Well, in some ways that kind of, I don't know at what point they said, oh, hang on, we can't just carpet this with council houses. We'll turn it into a recreational space and leave it. If they'd made that decision already, when they got to that stage, or before they took the roof off, they could have kept the building as a, whatever, youth club or whatever they wanted. But anyway, they just...
I know that Dr. Smith wrote to Durham.
Really? Oh, right.
He did recognise that Saxon window.
Right.
So he used to play there when we were kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he...
I don't know why, because it wouldn't have upset the architect's plans to have high rise and all the other stuff. And in fact, they kept where the mill race was and where the pond was, that's all been kept as part of the landscaping. You can still see it today, and where the dam was built and everything else. but it's just a great shame we've lost this. The only benefit is that there was an archaeological dig, Leslie Still and possibly Alan Palliser anyway, but it was a sort of well-respected amateur archaeologists who were around on Teesside in the 60s and so on, did a really good excavation of it. So and it fits in with the pattern I've shown you in other priory granges, where there's a relationship between this building, which is almost certainly the chapel, and the lodgings. And this was the vital door. This is the door that, when I showed you on the other plans, lodgings and chapel, there's an overlap where there's a door. That is the door where you would walk from the lodgings, which were here, into the chapel, and that's facing the east wall. But that's where the space is now, and that itself is a fantastic landscape, because it's got all the remains of the mill, the dam, the mill race, the pond, and the site of the farm, which was the site of the Priory Grange there. So that's why the building couldn't stay. That's what's so frustrating. Big place, as I say. This is after Pittington, it's probably the third biggest, and Beaurepaire is the biggest. Pittington, and then Bewley is the third of what they call the Looney Granges. Looney meaning games, because there was a period of relaxation when they basically they would send out monks for sort of R&R, if you like, to the Granges, where they didn't have to get up at 3 in the morning to do services, and they could just enjoy the rural environment. So these 4 sites, Wardley, Bewley, Pittington and Beaurepaire, were used for that purpose. So it was always invested with quite a lot of money, and you can see there's a big number of chambers, priors chambers, and 4 different chambers, as well as the chapel and the hall, and then the usual farm buildings after that, and more farm buildings right the way down. Nothing, well, there's building near gate and so on. So we've got a lot of buildings. And if you want to know what these look like, and it's the same with, I know from Beaurepaire, think of, if you go to Teesdale and you know all the Raby Estate farms, they're all painted white. If you want to imagine what this was like in medieval period, think white, basically, think lime wash. Raby Estate's the only one that now still lime washes its buildings, but every building was originally lime washed with a shelter coat. And Beaurepaire, when we were doing the excavations, it had stone roofs, it had ceramic tiles on the roof ridge, and on the end it had decorative tiles of sort of heads and figures and wild beasts and so on. And the whole place was painted white, because between 2 phases, the 13th and 14th century, where a 14th century wall abutted a 13th century wall, we found about 1.5 inches of basically lime wash, not render, just literally lime washed every year or 2, and it built up to an inch thickness. So it gleamed white in the same way. So go to Teesdale and imagine when you get a farm group with about a dozen farm buildings, that's give you an idea of what these priory granges look like in the landscape. And this is what's the right. This is a cut through from one pond to another, and this is the mill race, and there's a mill site over here. Robin Daniels, of course, has revisited this as an excavation and had another look at it. This is my drawing of just sketching. There was a survey done by Leslie Still. The red is the chapel and the hall, which is here. This is a pond. If you draw a sort of flat pond, there's a sort of squeeze point here where there's a dam, which is the construction which is mentioned in the account rolls. This is the mill race going around the back, and this is a cut through to another pond. So there's a series of ponds at different levels for fish, obviously, production. This is the very good archive, photo archive, that was done by Leslie Still. So we've got a lot of information here about the medieval plinth, windows. This is the foundation of the building, very similar to the one at Buggleswick. This is the chapel. You see, that's got the roof on. I mean, obviously it's half demolished there. Here it is still with the roof on. Oh look, we've got a medieval doorway. Stop! Just stop and think. You know, you could save this building. It's got a decent roof, it's got thick walls, but no, they just kept on demolishing it. Crazy. And you can just see here, this is the roof now, but can you see the steeper roof there, which would have gone even higher, and then it's been shaved off by this little bit of brickwork here. So I was able, and I got this online. I googled this 2 or 3 days ago, and blown me, there's a photograph I'd never even seen before, which shows it when the whole of the roof was off, gives us a bit more information about this, which has not been recorded by Leslie Still, but it is what it is. It's the chapel, and that is the overlap there. There would have been a hall here, and that's the doorway that links the two buildings. Now I did, yes, and this is Leslie Still's drawing showing the overlap. The chapel comes later, and so here the door link is there, you see, because there would have been a doorway to get a first floor level. The door was at the first floor level, that's the high status level, and that's where the door would have been. And I did a slightly better drawing, I think, to try and show the relationship of where the new windows were, and even attempted a sort of an illustration. This is the big prior's lodging house, the hall and chamber. This is the chapel. This is actually an external door, so the overlap is here to get between the two, the hall and the chapel. And there's a reference, and this is where I think landscape is getting interesting. There's a reference in 1383 for damming of a pond for the swans. That's that. So they've dammed that so that the swans are swimming on the lake. Overseen by the prior's lodgings, and this is the prior's chamber. And at Bow Repair, and this is the sketch at the top, there's a similar prior's chamber with a little oriel window looking out over the landscape. And I think this is a little bit of medieval landscaping, saying, let's make a pond, let's put the swans on, and you can imagine the prior in his chamber. All the farm buildings are somewhere else, away from here, probably to the north, and he's got a rather pleasant sight of swans swimming on the lake down below. So you can put together a sort of medieval landscape there. Just a sort of conclusion, this is the sort of layout that you get in a number of the sites. So we've got, this is Wardley actually, yes, this is Wardley, which I haven't discussed. It's now a building site, so it's a sort of scrap metal yard, but there are evidence of moats, but all this is gone. But they have found some 14th century buildings in some excavations. This is Bellasis, which has got the moat round it, and this is Hoffel, which is it's a moated site. Grange layout, well, I've really made the point here that you have your lodgings here and your farm buildings here. Lodgings here, farm buildings here. So always put your lodgings upwind of your farm. And the same relationship. This is the deanery in Durham Cathedral, which was the prior's lodgings in Durham Cathedral. And here's the hall here. There's a hall here going off the cloister. This is the critical hall. Overlap, the one doorway, and this is the chapel. So that's the same relationship you've got. And you've also got it at Buggleswick, you've also got it at Bewley. This is Finkel. Long building, chapel at the end. Bow Repair turned it on end. Long building, chapel at the end. Buggleswick, long building, chapel at the end. Bewley, long building, chapel at the end. With that, just enough overlap to get a doorway in. So there's a kind of commonality to them all. And we now have a medieval barn. We didn't know about medieval barns. We've got enough medieval barns recorded in something dendrology. We know what a medieval barn looks like. These are the ones that Hallgarth, I'll show you this one in a minute, which is a Wappo, Belmont. And they come up outside the Priory. The same group of builders who were building the Priory were building for other people. This is Sherburn Hospital, a leper hospital, and they're building a barn at Byers Garth, which still survives, 1470, dated by dendrochronology. And this is the one that went in the 1960s, and again, a campaign to try and save it. If you know High Grange Belmont Estate, just outside Durham City, this was the biggest barn in the north, certainly probably, well, it's been the north of England, certainly the northeast of England, about 150 foot long. Apparently there was some correspondence in the paper about let's try and save it. Massive thing, central doors, had triangular vents again, you see. Huge thing. I'd like to think these were taken down and used in a pigeon creek somewhere in Belmont, and that we could still find out where they are, and we could still dendrodate them, 70 years after. That's that. That's your three. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That must have been exhausting, actually, to work through all that at great speed. Can I ask if there are any questions?
Were the Grange farms worked by the monks, or did they employ, or were they tide workers and sort of feudal systems?
I don't think the Benedictine monks got their hands dirty, really. They organised. honest. They use what is called family in the accounts, and they are farm workers, some of which were tenants of theirs in their villages. I mean, I know, for example, the Hoffel one, all the lands around there are close to Shincliffe. So the Shincliffe tenants, they had an obligation that so many days a year, particularly at harvest time, they have to work for the prior as part of their arrangement of being on the land. And that's when, but that group of Bow Repair, for example, that building which looked like it was workers' cottages, whether they came in sort of seasonally and lived there, I don't know. There was no heating in that building. But certainly it's not like the Cistercians. You know, if you go to Revo or Fountains, you'll find that the lay brothers were actually doing the dirty work, and the brethren, you know, there were two classes of monk, but they didn't have that in the Benedictine. So I think there was a reeve normally, or somebody in charge who was probably paid. But I think what the assumption was that come harvest time, particularly, or sowing the crop, there would be a bit of an effort to pull in your tenants from around surrounding villages. That's how it worked.
And all hands to the work.
Yes. I mean, exactly the same thing has happened with the bishop. I mean, I live in West Auckland, but when the bishop had his hunt in Weardale, I, as a tenant of the bishop, was meant to go up and build literally a timber frame hall and lodgings for that 1 week when the bishop went hunting for the great hunt, and then he dismantled it again, bang the pegs out, take it back again. It was a demountable lodging house. But I live on West Auckland Village Green, so I'm a tenant of the bishop. I would have to go and spend 2 weeks and say I can't do my own farm work that week, because that I'm obliged to go to help the bishop out in Stanhope, you know. So it's the same, I think, with the Priory Granges and the tenants round about.
What relationships could Bewley and New Bewley? Because they're both right, there's direct paths to both of them from Bewley
Yes.
and Priory.
I'm guessing, I don't know, I mean, I presume, Newton Bewley sounds like a new village, I think, isn't it? I think it's a new settlement.
There's a very strict right of way going from Bewley Priory
Straight
right
through
to the back
I don't know.
of Newton Bewley. You can't break it, it goes from houses.
Right.
So I presume it was, I'm guessing, an outlying farm belonging to...
Yes, I guess it would be. Yes,
I
it would be.
don't know.
I don't know the extent of the Bewley estate, to be honest. That would be the issue. Sorry?
And the houses were originally owned by the bishop.
Yeah, well, yes, I think maybe it's fine.
And a lot of the tenants collected the salt,
Right.
and so obviously they had to pay so much salt to the bishop.
Right. All right. Well, I mean, New Bewley in my mind, sorry, I'm just trying to get back to, I thought, my last slide used to have who needs tunnels, because I live in West Auckland and my children went to a school and they were told categorically there was a tunnel from West Auckland to Durham Cathedral. It's only 14 miles and goes under the weir 3 times, you know, perfectly reasonable. And people are obsessed, and I think, for a long time thought, I'm a total tunnel skeptic, I don't believe them at all. They're just very good drains if they survive at all. I mean, if you've seen a good medieval drain, you'd think it was a tunnel. Anyway, it's a craving for people in the county to want to have a relationship with that building on the peninsula, I think. Well, in fact, we've got it anyway. We're all part of the diocese, part of the Palatinate, you know what I mean? And if you look in your deeds, somewhere along the line, you're either on the prior's land or on the bishop's land. So you don't need to create tunnels in your imagination to have that link. It's there all the time, you know what I mean? So who needs tunnels when we've got a whole agricultural landscape which is rooted in supplying and feeding materials and food through to the priory?
Sorry, one.
It's not a question how far you're going. It's just a piece of paper I've been given tonight, which is a translation. Paul will know where it is. On the wall behind the thing, which will be interesting. In Billingham, of Beverly died month of May 1400. And that's a translation of that. So I think probably was buried in the Lord Chancellor of this church.
Oh, my goodness.
And then there was a William Dyson who signed a lease for Bellasis in 1439 and 1446.
All right. Well, what I'll do, I'll leave this to Charles. And anybody can have it, like if you want, give me your email, I'll send it. This is my incomplete report written 15 years ago, and I've still got questions about it. But it was putting together, I was so kind of excited having met the lead, Admiral Lee and so on, that I need to get this down on paper. And it doesn't include that rather iffy plan, but it does include a background history as much as I could get it. And it might even mention the dice. So I got, well, it mentions 14th, 15th century people who were resident and so on. Yeah, but that's it, yeah. But I'll leave this as well.
What? I just think it's fascinating that Paul's giving you that translation of the and that, and it thinks in exactly what you're talking about.
If there aren't any more questions, I'm just going to quickly do a little promotion. And this is the commercial break that should have gone in the middle, really. Ian Nairn, does it ring a bell with anybody? Ring a bell? No, people sort of a certain age. He was an architectural writer in the 1970s, 1960s. He wrote for the Observer, wrote for the Architectural Review, and he was passionate about place and character in buildings. And he wanted to try and define a county in 1964 in the Architectural Review. He chose County Durham. He said, I will describe 76 villages in County Durham to try and nail in text what's the essential character, the industrial character, the collieries, but also the agricultural character, the moorlands, the quarries, whatever. And so we put them all in the Architectural Review. And I read this the first day I started working in Durham City in 1974, and I was transfixed by it. I was always a big Ian Nairn fan. He was on TV in my part of the world in the northwest. He did a series which was called Nairn's North. He had problems. He was alcoholic. He drank himself to death at the age of about 52. Died 3 days before Nicholas Pevsner, who died very happily, 80-odd. You know, led a long and satisfied life. Ian Nairn was always frustrated. Just go home and Google Ian Nairn, and you'll see some YouTube videos, and you'll get a sense of the man. Anyway, when I retired, I wanted to try and pull this writing, this brilliant writing on County Durham, out of the pages of the Architectural Review, wrote to the Architectural Press and said, could I reproduce it, not for my own personal benefit, and not for any personal credit, but to put the money towards Old Durham Gardens, where I'm a trustee. And if you don't know Old Durham Gardens, it's a place that's about a mile outside Durham City. We'll be open today, we're open on Sunday afternoons, but the main site is open all the time. And basically they said yes, and Yale University Press gave me some photographs. So I kind of put it together a bit like a poetry book, because I think it's brilliant writing. It's the best writing on County Durham, certainly in the 20th century. He wrote about 76 villages, including Billingham and Stockton, but Witten Park and places he wouldn't think of. He didn't write about Durham City. He said, why would he write about Durham City? Everybody knows about Durham. But the rest of Durham, he didn't know. He told everybody he was born in Newcastle upon Tyne. His parents were. He was born in Bedford, which he was embarrassed about. He said, Bedford is the most boring historic market town in England, but Newcastle is just amazing. It's superb. And he wanted to be a northeasterner. So I got his biographer to write an introduction to this. It's available for a £5, and essentially half of that goes to Old Durham, half pays for the original printing. If you want one, put it there for a £5. Sorry, thank you, Charles. That's it.
Well, thank you, Martin. It was absolutely fascinating. The bit, I have to say, right at the beginning, which you said that the bishop split his lands with the priory, so that the priory had enough to be able to survive on. I thought that was fascinating, but it threw right back into the pot for me. I thought I had a clear picture of kind of how the bishops and the priors worked in relation to this church. And now it's all confused again, so I'm going to have to go away and do some more research. But thank you very much. It was really fascinating. A bit of history I didn't know at all, and I'm really grateful to you for thank you for coming along. So perhaps if we could give Martin perhaps another round of applause. And to all of you, before you go, have a cup of tea or have a cup of coffee, and there are buns at the back. And thank you very much for coming. It's a great pleasure to see you here tonight. Thank you.